Hello everyone, bonjour à toutes et à tous. I am delighted to join you as you continue to share ideas and to network at the Toronto Global Forum. A special shout out to our 3 members of the Canadian Agricultural Youth Council who are attending the forum. Minelik Bien, an environmental biologist from Toronto who is passionate about environmental conservation, agricultural reform, and food sovereignty. Emily Bland, an Indigenous farmer and woman entrepreneur who runs a hydroponic social enterprise in Newfoundland and Labrador. And Thomas Louis Lavallée, a young horticultural producer from Quebec who works in farm finance and is very involved in the Canadian agricultural community. Please make sure to connect with these outstanding young people. They are the future of our industry. This morning, you are exploring a question that will shape the future of our industry: how technology is transforming our farms and our food processors. Canada's agriculture and food system is vital to our Canadian economy, to the green transition of our economy, and to the food security of our planet. Today, the sector is at the forefront of Canada's economic recovery following 2 years of unprecedented challenges, including a global pandemic, extreme weather events, labor shortages, supply chain disruptions, and Russia's brutal attack on Ukraine. Together, these challenges have placed global food security at greater risk than ever. These are global issues, and they demand global solutions. We need to work together, all countries, industry, organizations, citizens, to make the supply chains more resilient, to support science-based trade, to promote sustainable agriculture, to drive innovation and investment in the sector, and to end world hunger. En septembre dernier, je suis allée en Indonésie pour rencontrer mes homologues ministres de l'Agriculture du G20. Ensemble, on a renouvelé notre engagement envers une agriculture durable portée par l'innovation. Dans l'avenir, la croissance économique et l'adoption de nouvelles technologies propres n'iront pas l'une sans l'autre, et elles permettront d'en arriver à une production agricole durable. On a tous quitté la réunion avec une pensée en tête: la collaboration est la clé pour l'atteinte de nos objectifs de développement durable. En travaillant avec les autres pays, le Canada peut maximiser ses opportunités de protection de l'environnement tout en améliorant l'efficience des exploitations agricoles et en stimulant notre économie. If we are to empower our farmers and food processors to feed the world sustainably, we must continue to invest in innovation as a driver of sustainable food production and food security. Canada is already a global leader in agri-food innovation, from animal genetics to plant science to precision agriculture. Today, onboard computers, satellite receivers, drones, and robotics are more commonly part of the farmer's toolbox. These tools allow farmers to boost production and farm more sustainably by targeting chemicals and fertilizer right down to the square meter. Farmers and food processors are using robotics and digital management to overcome labor shortages, reduce food waste, and explore new markets such as gluten-free or plant-based ingredients. For example, a Manitoba oat processor using advanced food processing technology to serve the gluten-free market. There are also exciting opportunities in the fields of digital agriculture and AI to accelerate smart and sustainable innovation. Over the coming years, we will turn to agri-food innovators and investors more than ever to help us respond to current and future challenges such as the effects of climate change. Innovation takes creativity, inspiration, and vision, but it also takes investment. If agtech companies are to help our food industry feed the world sustainably, they need startup capital to get their ideas out of the laboratory and into the marketplace. An increase of smart new capital in our industry will help to drive innovation and support sustainable agriculture, economic, environmental, and social. As the Government of Canada, we get it. That's why we continue to work with key partners to attract foreign direct investment to the sector. And that's why we are making historic investment in agricultural innovation and sustainability. We have committed $1.5 billion over the next 10 years to help farmers adopt new and greener technologies and practices. For example, technologies to transform animal waste on a dairy farm into green natural gas to power not only the farm, but the local community. When it comes to fostering a culture of innovation in our sector, there is no question that partnership is the way forward. Le gouvernement du Canada continue de travailler avec le secteur privé pour investir dans un secteur agricole novateur et durable. Par exemple, Protéines Industrie Canada, l'une de nos grappes d'innovation, permet de canaliser des centaines de millions de dollars pour renforcer la position du Canada comme chef de file dans les protéines végétales. Selon l'organisation, dans les 10 prochaines années, le Canada sera la source de 10% des ingrédients végétaux dans le monde. Ça veut dire que le Canada pourrait compter 25 milliards de dollars en ventes supplémentaires par année pour créer 17 000 emplois. This summer, my fellow agriculture ministers and I reached an agreement on the new Sustainable Canadian Agricultural Partnership. Over the next 5 years, the partnership will drive investments of hundreds of millions of dollars to help Canada secure its place as a global leader in sustainable agricultural production. Looking ahead, innovation will continue to propel Canada and the world into the future of food. 5 years ago, Dominic Barton, who is your guest speaker this week, released a report challenging us to unleash the power of Canadian agriculture. Today, that challenge is more relevant than ever. Global demand for sustainable food is growing at a record pace. In Asia alone, some 3 billion people are expected to join the middle class over the next 2 decades. Last month, I was on a trade mission to Indonesia and the Philippines, which are strong and growing markets for Canadian agriculture and food products. The good news is that Canada has some key advantages that will give us an edge over the competition. We have an abundance of farmland and water resources. We have a skilled agricultural workforce. We have strong financial institutions. And we have smart people like you who can keep our industry a step ahead of the competition. Together, these advantages create a powerful brand for Canadian food that's tough to beat. So, in your time together today, I urge you to give serious consideration to agriculture and food as a smart investment with tremendous potential for growth in the future. And I urge you to explore how we can accelerate innovations and technologies that will grow our economy, help our farmers and food processors to feed the world sustainably, and leave no one behind. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the forum. Merci, et je vous souhaite un excellent forum.
Really glad to have all of you here today, and I'd like to introduce you to my fantastic panel. I have Bill Greuel from Protein Industries Canada. Lejjy, I never know your last name because you have such a thank you, because you have such a distinctive first name. You're like Cher. You really don't need the last name at all. David Gauthier from Natural Products Canada, and Mohammed Ashour from Aspire Foods. I should have mentioned the Bissan being, in the Beyonce and Cher tier. Lejjy also heads up Cult Food Products. So anyhow, we're here today, and the opening remarks were really interesting to me because technology is very fascinating, and it is this golden age of food science right now in the world, not just in Canada. But as my panelists, who are all really right on the bleeding edge of this whole sphere of change, they're going to tell you about what technology can do and what it could do even more so if certain conditions were in place. So grab your pens. I think we're going to have a really great conversation. So I'm going to start with you, Bill. Protein Industries Canada, you've had quite a few years now to be cultivating this plant-based space and to be really learning about what's happening in the industry, who's adopting technology, who isn't. And I don't know, can you tell us, is it different between, say, the agricultural side of the value chain and the food end of the value chain? Or is it a continuous adoption curve?
Yeah, well, there probably is, but I think what we are striving to do and what we need is to get the continuous value chain approach. And so it's a very interesting space, and I'll just talk from the plant-based food space. We're at this great nexus today of massive global opportunity, like Minister Bibo indicated. This is an industry going to be measured in the hundreds of billions of dollars. In Canada, we think this can be a $25 billion opportunity. So that lends itself to collaborative innovation. But I think what I'm seeing in terms of attitude and approaches to the adoption of innovation is that the technological challenges and the issues that we're trying to solve in the global food systems around, access to food, sustainability of food, climate change, all of those issues are no problems that any one organization can solve on its own. So this idea of collaborative innovation and companies that are so open to innovating in collaboration with plant genetics companies and digital agriculture companies, together with ingredient manufacturers and plant-based food companies at the other end, innovating up and down the value chain is the real trend that I've seen in the last little while. And that's something that needs to continue as we try to tackle some of those big major issues that we're trying to solve.
That's great. And, being a network at Canadian Food Innovation, we are seeing a lot of willingness for collaboration, but not necessarily all the tools and mechanisms. So hopefully folks like us can continue to work together. I think we've got a great vibe going so far. Mohammed, Aspire is this amazing accomplishment. You've grown this company, this hatch to harvest concept. You're producing 13 million kilograms of cricket protein a year. Like that's a lot of crickets, right? How did you accomplish this? Were there technologies that were, just out of the box that you're like, oh, I'll buy that, I'll figure out how to integrate them? Or was this something that you needed to develop and, was the recipe there for you? How did you do it?
Yeah, no, it's an interesting question. I think, Aspire probably serves as a really good case study for, the opportunities and challenges involved in trying to innovate and bootstrap, not just a new company in agribusiness, but really an entire new industry, which in our case was insect agriculture. When we first started back in 2013, there really wasn't, off the shelf, at Home Depot cricket watering technology, or we couldn't go buy, systems to automatically deliver food to crickets or something like that. So in the early days, you have this unfortunate reality where you have to pretty much vertically integrate everything. You have to develop all your technologies in-house. But over time, what ends up happening is you end up shifting your technological IP roadmap to try as much as possible to take off-the-shelf technologies that are already proven, where the risks have already been retired, and you just simply adopt and customize some aspects of those to your approach. But I think the bigger challenge is, when we talk about technology, there's chips and silicon, but there's also selective breeding. There's also innovation on the consumer side. And I think one of the interesting things we faced was understanding early on, okay, what are we uniquely good at? Which specific areas in technology?
That's every company's challenge, right? What's your differentiator?
Exactly. And then what are the other aspects that we could outsource or partner with institutions or organizations or consultants or partners who really understand that piece, and they can actually be the ones to deliver that. So I think that's been one of the primary focus areas for us, is really doubling down on the actual core production side, and then everything related to the consumer side, the ingredient processing. We realize we don't have to figure out and optimize the ingredient processing. There's companies and contract manufacturers that have done this for decades and decades. So to go to them and just say, hey, here's a new ingredient, here's a massive market opportunity that it represents, you should figure out a way to process it. And for them, the incremental effort it takes to use. I mean, they process everything from shrimp to blueberries. It's not going to be hard to figure out how to process crickets.
Gotcha. Yeah, it sounds like a monumental task, but you make it sound pretty easy. David, natural products, technology, they sound like they're kind of at odds. When we think of things that are natural, we don't necessarily think of there being a need for an intervention from science or technology. But can you tell us how your innovators, the members of Natural Products Canada, how they're using technology to do really cool things that are adding value to Canada's economy and to consumers' lives?
Sure. Yeah, technology is a pretty interesting word. So, if you look through the dictionary in terms of a definition, it's simply the practical application of knowledge. That's it. So the cups on your table are coffee consumption technology. If you wear contacts or glasses, it's vision enhancing technology. But depending on what that useful practical application is, brings very different ideas into people's minds. So, centuries ago, technology would have been a wind-powered or a water-powered mill. That would have evolved into steam-powered, large-scale manufacturing, then internal combustion engines, and then electronics.
Yeah, like
most people think
pen to the computer, right?
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So when people say tech now, you basically think of your consumer electronics. You think of hardware and software, and there's no doubt that that is a predominant technology that is a supporting and enabling technology for just about every sector out there. And the meaning and the thoughts around those words change very, very quickly. So when I started my career about 25 years ago, if you would have talked about ag tech at that time was all of the progress we'd made on gene sequencing, creating genomes, coming up with things like marker-assisted breeding, some of the early biotechnology plays that really help on the production side of agriculture and getting new varieties out there. That's what it meant. Today, if you talk about ag tech, you're talking about drones, you're talking about data collection on a farm, precision farming. And so that whole term ag tech means something different today than it did less than 25 years ago. So that's one of the primary reasons that Natural Products Canada came to be, because of all of the focus on the digital side of technology. We realize that there still are an awful lot of biological problems that need to be resolved and that have to contribute to a healthier people, healthier animals, healthier planet. So we're entirely focused on biologically based solutions to solve all of these big problems. And that's what kind of sets us apart from other organizations. But it still requires lots and lots of technology. So for example, if you want to create a natural ingredient, which is a healthy ingredient to go into people's foods, that could be done through extraction technology. So we've invested in clean extraction technologies that allow these products to get to market with a clean label without having to use toxic solvents. You might want to produce these ingredients or other products through fermentation. So you're using a microorganism to produce protein, produce some sort of an ingredient for food or cosmetics, perhaps a bioplastic that's better for the environment. We would invest in biosensors, so sensors that can be out there monitoring the environment so that people can take a intervention where it comes to wastewater treatment, those sorts of things. So there are an awful lot of problems to solve, and a lot of these are based on core life sciences. We can't find enough people to fill the life science vacancies in Canada. This is a big issue where there's been so much attention on the digital side of technology and engineering and other facets of it. So we need to get back to basics, because the more we need to deal with climate change, sustainable food supplies, all of these big global issues, we need to know how to work with these organic materials to transform them into things that are more valuable in a more efficient way.
Yeah, that's it's fascinating, and it makes me think about how the traditional, engineering, food science, computer science departments at universities and colleges need to start having a lot more intersection. So thank you for that. Lejjy, you are a pioneer in the cell ag
Thanks.
foods. Yeah, you're amazing. The things that you've done early on. You've already had an exit from a business in this space, and you're building this really interesting integrated concept at Cult. When you talk to VCs and get exposed to them, what's attracting them to this space? Is it that it's new and exciting and IP driven, or is it that they watch the Jetsons and they want to see that food replicator in their kitchen? Like, is it a consumer thing or an IP thing?
Yeah. So for those that are not familiar with, say, agriculture, at its core, it's really about taking advantage of the power of the cell. So people are familiar with a burger, so it'd be taking a cell sample from like a cow and then replicating that, and you end up with real meat.
It's bioidentical.
Exactly, it's bioidentical. And that's what we focus on at Cult Food Science. But an interesting part that I always like to mention is that it's way, way more now than just the burger, which is what has got a lot of investment interested. It includes milks, it includes materials, collagen, chocolate, honey.
That's what fascinates me, and is this ingredient opportunity. I think that's if we could save, I think I did a little research, between chocolate, vanilla, and coffee, Canada spends $2.5 billion a year bringing that to our country. Can you imagine if we could create industry in Canada to make those things locally?
Yeah, that is
pretty
three
cool.
things that we have in our portfolio.
Oh, do
that
you?
can
Fantastic.
do it in bioreactors, regardless of the climate, to really take advantage of the effect that potential for sustainability that exists in these technologies is very new, especially considering the challenges we're facing now. And that attracts a lot of new investors in the space. Once they find out it's more than just about the burger, it is about every single food product, especially with
And vitamin and, just all of these amazing ingredients.
Yes.
Yeah. So it feels like we're just at the beginning of the education curve, not just for VCs, but for consumers as well.
Yes. Yeah. And the great part about investing in it is because a lot of the technology is so new, hasn't been touched before, is almost every company is developing unique IP. And also because it's new, the companies are very much forced to think about their customers. For some people, it can be very exotic. So there's a nice forcing function there with how exotic it can be to some people to maintain that customer focus.
Yeah, I like that you chose the word exotic, because with a lot of things that are new, there's often fear. That's a whole other panel. But
Yes.
So I'm going to shift in. I have a question for all of you. So, I've worked for a long time, the last decade or so, mostly working with small and medium-sized businesses as they've been trying to grow. And there's a struggle to get capital. The food business doesn't grow like this. Food production kind of grows. You get to this stage in your business, you get to capacity in your facility, and then all of a sudden you need a whole bunch more capital to get here, and it's a hard journey. So I'd just love to hear from each of you. How do you see companies at this tier finding investment, and what limits them from adopting technology into their businesses? And if you have the insight, are tangible technologies like machines like bioreactors or, high pressure pasteurization for, a natural product to be more stable, is that more appealing than, say, the sensors and the digital and the AI and machine learning tools? So not sure who'd like to start, but why don't we do, Bill, you're right here. Why don't we go down the line?
Yeah, I'm trying to think how to tackle this because it's a big question.
Big, I know.
And I'll maybe just speak in terms of not thinking about technology in isolation, right? And so it's a really, really critical piece in terms of innovation and competitiveness. But I think one of the things that we're finding, and maybe the challenge that companies are having without getting access to, if they're having trouble accessing capital, it's not necessarily because of the technology, but it's all the other risks that we have to consider inside the box. And so it just, if I think about it from an ingredient manufacturing perspective, and I know you were probing a bit on food, but this is a highly innovative, highly technical.
Without ingredients, there's no food.
Yeah,
it's your pantry.
So, thinking about it in terms of the whole value chain, in terms of supply, having to have relationships with farmers, farmers, having the technology, the intellectual property, the business acumen, the financial strategy, the offtake agreements. I think technology is one piece in there. And so what is preventing companies from adopting technology? In often cases, it's having that start to finish value chain approach. So if they go to the capital markets but don't have a supply agreement with producers to ensure that the facility has access to raw commodities or offtake agreements on the back end, that's preventing access to capital, which is really what's preventing scaling from technology perspective.
Yeah, it's interesting. And when you think about how some of the companies that are your members have gone from being commodity producers to then adding on that next phase, that fractionation and building out, it's one thing when you have a new business line to put in technology, but when you have been doing something for a long time and then all of a sudden this new end-to-end technology comes out, there must be, a lot of people who go, well, what I've got is pretty good and I can work with it. It's hard to just jump into something completely new, right?
I often get asked why the major canola crushers in Western Canada don't bolt on technology to extract protein out of canola, because it's just not that easy.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just not that easy.
Exactly. So from your perspective, Lejjy, how would you approach this question?
Yeah, from the cellular agriculture industry, also part of its newness on some of the points that you mentioned is the playbook has definitely changed. You can't use the same one that maybe you had before from an investment perspective that worked for the last 20, 30 years. It really crosses that Venn diagram of life sciences, agriculture, manufacturing, and can be very hard to know and follow the same patterns for adopting this new technology because you may not have the expertise in-house. You might not be able to align it with even how you make money necessarily right now. It can be so different with the inputs. So for cellular agriculture, you're not really using a lot of land whatsoever, which is part of its core value proposition. But there's many groups where that is actually part of how they make money and can be a huge part of the calculus. So it is really about developing a new playbook to adopt this technology internally, to invest in it, really looking at it at fresh eyes, because what maybe before doesn't work anymore.
And in speaking to some academics about some of the challenges in the cell food space, I've been told that a lot of people are trying to adopt traditional fermentation technology into their practices, and that just the same way as yes, you can try to eat soup with a fork. It's a spoon's better, right? So, is anybody creating the spoon?
Yes, that is almost every company. There is an assumption in this space, I want to say about 20 years ago now, actually, when it first really got talked about, that we'd be able to adopt from traditional fermentation or even from medical technologies, tissue engineering especially. If we can grow a heart, we should be able to grow a steak. It's way more simple, right?
Grow a heart.
And that was the assumption, is a lot of the organ development technologies, advanced biomedical sciences could apply for it. But the factors are really different. So especially the early companies, even still now, they're building their own spoon, so to speak. Whether that's a new bioreactor design, a new scaffold design, new cell lines, because they've never been researched before. Lobster is an easy example. Wasn't really genetically researched a lot. So a company had to crack that from scratch to be able to make lobster meat. So they really are making their own new strides in this.
Craving a lobster omelet. David, you have this view. You have so many members. I used to be on David's board, so I got to see a lot of the growth in Natural Products Canada's community. So you probably see lots of outliers, but just generally trend-wise, what are you seeing in the natural products space and with these companies that are now, I guess, your network's been established for a while, are really growing and scaling?
Right. Yeah, so from the investor point of view, I've lived my whole life kind of around the agriculture, sector in some way, shape, or form, and it was always seen as the poor little brother to pharma, right? So in terms of getting dollars from investors, the agriculture sector was always lagging behind, seen as a boring, traditional, non-growth kind of a marketplace. That has all changed. I mean, food is sexy now. I hate to say it, but healthy food and lots of food entrepreneurs out there. And a lot of attention has gone into the food sector, also around because of some of the adoption of the digital technologies. So people who have made money in software are now seeing agriculture as another vertical that they can apply technology that they already understand. So all the dynamics around it are actually good. The problem is that there's so many different individual business models, so much risk in people in Bill's industry where you need to build a $250 million plant to produce at enough scale in order to be profitable. People don't understand that risk. So the way we operate at Natural Products Canada is it's all about what is an entrepreneur's next best step. That's really all you can worry about. The day you wake up and say, I want to get into the food business, is not the day you go and ask someone for $250 million to build the big plant. You need to do a lot of other things. So we're fortunate that we have funding from the federal government through Strategic Innovation Fund to be able to help companies take those next steps. So if you simply need more information, I don't have my business plan fully fleshed out yet. We do have a program for that. If you need to add people to your team, so you need to add some technical staff to work on development of a technology, we have a program for that. If you need to do some scale up or some co-manufacturing, produce some, pilot early stage products that maybe then you could take out for testing and maybe get one of those offtake agreements that Bill talked about to sort of then set you up for a larger financing, we have a program for that. And we've always also had our own investment fund. So when we were first funded back in 2016, we took almost half of that funding we got through another federal program at that time and put it into our own investment fund. So we would work with companies, and then when it came time for them to get their first real external investment, we were there to put money on the table and get behind those opportunities. So that really helped bring
So if I could break in for a second, just like get right, probe right in. How many of the members would you say, like just in sort of round percentage terms, come to you for investment and for that technology kind of help? You mentioned that program where you can help people to understand their technology. Yeah. Would that be one of your highly subscribed programs? Is that?
Yeah, definitely now the proof of concept where, this is all about, you can't afford your own facility, but there are probably service providers, contract manufacturers out there who have the technology in place to be able to help you take that next step. So it's about making sure people are aware of those opportunities. You don't have to go out and buy everything and start, and actually would probably be silly to do so. It's probably
until you've truth tested it. It's usually better
to do your testing on the other side. So it's all about, are you doing the right thing? Are you involved with the right CRO? Do they have the right technology? Mm-hmm. Some people go to some place to get something fermented, but then they realize that the post-processing equipment at that facility isn't ideal for their particular kind of product. So comes out of the spray dryer a little bit too sticky. So an unfortunate result, but at least there was learning of, next time.
And they didn't lose their home because of it, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So it's those kind of steps that we help them take. And I think if you help people take the right steps and they become de-risked, then other investors come and look and say, I see, these companies have been through this before. These people have gotten investment, and now I think that I want to take a look. But all you can do is help them take the next best step.
Yeah, interesting. So, Mohammed, to get back to the original question, because it's been a minute since we were there. What do you see limiting the adoption of technology? And you have invested heavily in it, but you're an exception.
Yes. Well, and that's interesting. I'll tell you, very briefly my story. I had no business getting into business. I did a life sciences degree at the University of Toronto. Then I went to do a master's degree in neuroscience. Then I went to do a joint degree in medicine and an MBA at McGill. I wanted to be a neurosurgeon that maybe one day runs a hospital. And then I received an email that completely changed my life. It was an invitation to participate in a business competition called the Hult Prize. And it was a $1 million prize aimed at entrepreneurs looking to build a business to address world hunger. And at the time, I had just started med school and realized that the vast majority of healthcare dollars, about 80% of healthcare dollars in OECD countries, goes into clinical medicine, even though clinical medicine only drives 20% of outcomes. And things like public health, nutrition are far more deterministic on people's healths than even clinical medicine is. And so I put together a team, we started doing some research. That's when we came across this extraordinary idea that insects are a widely consumed protein source in so many parts of the world, but nobody's figured out a way to make this an available protein and an affordable protein at scale. And that was really the genesis and the idea behind Aspire. Fast forward a year later, we defeated 10,000 teams from 180 countries to win that $1 million Hult Prize. And that was obviously monumental. It gave us an enormous amount of credibility, which...
Just asking, US dollars?
Yes,
oh,
US
man.
dollars. The exchange rate wasn't quite as favorable as today, but so that was monumental, and it obviously gave us a lot of momentum to be able to go and raise capital, but we then hit a wall very quickly. And the reason is because what we were basically going to pitch investors is, hey, we would like to build not just a company, but really the infrastructure of an entire industry. So that's a very capital intensive proposition, right?
Transformation
Yes.
is hard.
Very hard. So not everybody can be, like an Elon Musk who happens to have exited out of PayPal and decides to put $100 million into his electric car venture, right? Because that's what it's going to take to just get it off the ground. Gestation period for a business where you have to build an industry is over 10 years. Most venture capital funds are 5 to 7 year period. So you're just fundamentally mismatched from day one from their investment thesis to begin with. So that's
Well, they're hooked on ICT, right? Silicon Valley is like fast turnaround, 10x in 2 years, right?
Absolutely. I mean, you could argue that that's starting to change now, but even still today, that's the dominant reality for most startups. And so how do you, as a capital intensive business that is ultimately manufacturing food, you're never going to have software margins. And that's a failed premise. Why should you compete with software margins? You're in completely anti-correlated markets. And that's the challenge, unfortunately. I mean, you look at Beyond Meat, that is a very powerful value proposition and a good product. But if you start applying software multiples to essentially a consumer brand that makes food, you're going to be disappointed. And that doesn't in any way invalidate the thesis of that brand. It just invalidates your false thesis that you entered into this equation with. And so I think that there's a need to educate, not educate, because I think the investment community understands the value proposition, but there's a huge delta in the opportunity that the investor sees themselves leaving on the table by going after, let's say, food or manufacturing as opposed to tech or SaaS. So one of the areas that can be very helpful is a collaboration between government and the private sector and even commercial lenders in terms of creating incentives around agriculture and around agri-food businesses. Mm-hmm. So, and those incentives don't have to be grants, so it's subsidized by the government. It could be in the form of, a reduction of taxes on capital gains from some of those profits or some of those exits. There can be very creative ways you can do this, but you can't, if it takes a village to raise a child, imagine what it takes to build an entire industry. So if we weren't lucky enough to win this $1 million prize that happened to give us the credibility to then be able to get family offices who have very patient capital.
And that's the thing, it's that credibility. And David, referred to this too, and this like, you've got to do all these things before you ask for $250 million, like that. It's A teams with, B products, in my experience, can really succeed, much more sometimes than an A product with a very uninitiated entrepreneur. Like you almost need to be anointed by something like this prize.
Well, and that's the thing. So while I'm very grateful that we won this prize, and I'm very we're very fortunate that we happen to interact with family offices with very patient capital, and that sort of gave us the training wheels, which we eventually outgrew, and then we were able to stand on our own 2 feet, and we just built a $100 million facility in London, Ontario, here in Canada, first of kind in the world. It will be an exporter, not of protein, but of technology. We just signed a fairly large MOU with one of the largest food and beverage companies in South Korea. Imagine if we didn't win the Hulk Prize. I'd be a neurosurgeon down the street. Not bad.
Which is good. Yeah,
I'm not.
I'd still be kind of proud.
Yeah.
She'd be like, here's a picture of my son Mohammed.
Oh, she would be more proud if I was a neurosurgeon. My parents are of Egyptian origin. When I sat down with my mom and told her I'm dropping out of med school to go farm crickets, it was not a fun conversation. But you know, so I think that that's not a scalable process. You can't generate 1 million Hulk Prizes, you know, or 10 of them a year. So there has to be a way to stimulate and support entrepreneurs, especially in early industries. And I think that that's a combination of subsidization and incentives is necessary to support these industries. And our thesis, and I suspect this is Lejjy's thesis, these are not nice to have products. Right? This is not like an iPad, which nobody needs or wants.
It's not discretionary.
If we believe that our land is rapidly running out of land and water, and our population is rapidly growing in appetite and people, we urgently need solutions.
Well, it's true, because it's not an either or proposition anymore. When you talk about crickets and cell ag, it's an and, because, you know, we can keep using land-based agriculture for protein, but we're not going to have any more land. So yeah, we're going to have to shift at least a portion of our calories to other more, you know, more scalable food sources. So I'm going to stick with you, because you have, as you mentioned, this $100 million plant. You've got all this great technology, and everywhere I go, it's like, you know, data. You've got to collect data, and everyone's hoarding data. But I don't see a lot of people using it, and I think there's some, you know, that when we talk about capital in particular, sometimes you see, and I know Bill's got things to say about this too, sometimes you see that people, you know, they'll go, okay, well, this is what I really need, so I'll buy this particular technology, and that'll give me data, but then it's not connected with other things. So could you, you know, just reflect a little bit on like the power of having a fully integrated system where the robotics and the sensors and the everything else gives you, you know, real-time information, and how that helps you as a business person and to run a good business?
Absolutely. And to answer that question, I'll give you an example. So in 1957, or in the 1950s, a 57-day-old chicken at harvest was about 2 pounds. Today, that same 57-day-old chicken is 8 pounds. So in a span of about 60 years, through so much, you know, data, whether it's gathered by hand in the early days and recently more with more modern methods, you've learned a lot about that animal, what it consumes, how it consumes. You've optimized its diet, its environment. Now, there's also animal welfare considerations we're not going to get into right now, but those are on the table. And you figure out a way, how do you maximize how much this animal eats and grows in that same time period? Now, the problem with growing anything outdoors is you control nothing. You don't control the wind, you don't control the sun, you don't control a lot of the different factors. And as a result of this, you know, let's say a farmer, you know, happens to harvest 10% more this year than any other year. It's a blockbuster harvest. That's amazing. Problem is, A, you don't know what led to that increase in a very causal way. And even if you're super data driven and you tracked every single thing every single day, replicating those conditions again is going to be very hard, just because you can't actually control those factors. When you grow indoors, you control everything. And so you can actually very, very readily capture data to understand the environment. So in the case of the production of crickets, which think of them as growing inside a box, you know, the size of this table, and you have like 30,000 crickets in a box the size of this table that's fully enclosed. Inside that box, you have the food, you have the water, but you also maintain a certain temperature and humidity. And you want to understand at day 30 when you harvest, what was your yield? And so you can kind of fiddle with the temperature, you can change the humidity, you can increase the feed, you can modify the feed, and then you start to track how these variables correlate to your production. We were able in 5 years, not 60, 5 years, to increase our production by 10 times.
Wow.
And that's because we gather a lot of data, but it's not, to your point, just about gathering the data. The next part of that equation that is more important is what do you do with that data and how do you actually find those correlations in that data? Now, when we were at a pilot scale and we were gathering, tens of thousands of data points a day, you could have your data scientists going through that and your statisticians trying to find those correlations. Today, we're going to be generating 30 million data points per day from our facility in London. So we actually now have to use applied machine learning to look at this data to identify correlations within that data that then can enable us to make those adjustments. And so you end up with this sort of self-correcting smart system. But to the very first question you asked, we didn't build the data sensor network. Why would we? There's companies out there that know how to do that very well. We didn't develop the algorithms. Why would we? There's companies out there that do that very well. So we partnered with the next generation manufacturing supercluster. We brought on board companies like TELUS, a very advanced, mature company, all the way to a startup like Darwin AI that brought together the technologies that really complemented what this mission was and actually helped us achieve it.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, because just this acquisition of data is always, to what end, a question for me. And I understand that, for instance, in speaking to Genome Quebec recently, their CEO said that they're very proud that in Quebec they have this amazing strength in AI, and that they think that's going to be extremely important for the development of the genomics that go into cellular food and cell ag. Lejjy. So, how you were mentioning to me before we started that you just met a new company who's like days old the other day. Like how ready are the startups in the cell food space to embrace that technology and to use it? Are they fully aware of all these types of companies and services that Mohammed just talked about?
Oh, yes, very much so.
That's great. So they're really sophisticated.
Yeah, a lot of them develop it internally as well, especially of like design of experiments models, talking about cost of scaling. There's a lot of attention in the cellular agriculture space to being able to leverage software, machine learning technologies to cut down on the number of experiments and iterations, who can actually translate to millions of dollars once you get past the first starting stage and are looking at fleshing out your first pilot plant, is developing that from scratch. So as opposed to having to do 100 experiments at the bench top, you're able to cut it down to your most likely 20 or 10, which has real tangible savings.
So this isn't just a cricket thing. This is happening in lots of different areas. This power of data.
Yes. I mean, you're a technology company either by choice or by force, and food is no exception, where we have to make sure that we're utilizing it correctly and taking advantage of what we can to either A, create new industries, or B, to actually help address the challenges that are brand new, that we have no choice in, that are coming in the future, such as climate change and how that'll affect how we currently produce our food.
Cool. So Bill, not dwelling as much on data now, but talking a little bit about how, difficult it is for somebody who has a new idea and they've done something that they want to make sure they can replicate and scale. I hear from people that there's a lack of co-packers, there's a lack of pilot facilities, and how would an investment in that space help Canadians to refine their prototypes and demonstrate a more attractive ROI to investors?
Yeah, it's critical. And so if you look at the Canadian landscape, we have a huge lack of scale-up infrastructure in terms of co-packing, co-manufacturing facilities in this country. And it's probably true for North America, but in Canada, if we take a step back and think about the why that is, and I'm coming at this from a plant-based ingredient and food space. There's a couple of reasons. It's an awfully big country. We're pretty well dispersed across it. We're next to, the biggest economy in the world with 330 million people, and people like to invest in the US versus Canada. And the industry is relatively new and just emerging. And so we just don't have the facilities. And so an investment there is critical, but I think it's more important about where is the investment going to come from. In my opinion, it has to be private sector investment. We've been down this road in Canada with trying to establish scale-up facilities by government, and it was successful. I don't know if people are familiar with the POS pilot plant in Saskatoon. It was a great facility, but it just could not be maintained and couldn't make it work. And so it's really critical as the industry grows that we're making a case to organizations that are in the co-packing, co-manufacturing, scale-up contract research phase, that this is an industry that's going to be measured in the tens of billions of dollars in Canada. And this is a jurisdiction where you can make a good business case. It's really critical because you described it in your opening comments about how food companies scale. It's not linear.
No.
And so we need more facilities like this in Canada to get companies from where they are today to having an impact across the retail grocery chain in Canada.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you made a distinction between ingredients and food, that is ready to eat a few minutes ago, and I think there's more attention on creating these spaces where people can do the finished products. I like to talk about where transformative innovation comes from and how it's pre the Grand Prix Awards and the CL Innovation Awards. It's what all of us are doing here that is the engine for what then those brand owners will incorporate into their consumer-facing products. So, if we want to keep that consumer-focused tier growing and thriving globally in exports, you're right. We've got to feed that engine, don't we? We're coming to about 10 minutes left. I would love to just ask each of you to take a minute, maybe two, and tell us one takeaway that you really want this audience, both online, thank you for tuning in, by the way, and all these smiling faces here, what you want people to go home tonight, and when somebody says to them, how was your day, that they say, you know what I heard. So what's that little nugget? David, I'm hoping you can start because I haven't heard your lovely voice in a few minutes.
Oh gosh, that's a hard question. Thanks for letting me go first. The way we look at things is you got to think about the entire ecosystem, right? You can't look at building an industry one piece at a time and only focusing on that one piece. So this session's about technology. We've talked a little bit about capital. But there's other things too, right? There's the whole regulatory environment. There is how important is this to a nation in terms of the government, filling in those gaps at early stages to get it going. And that's really who we are as a network. We're all about building the ecosystem. So again, people are out there that you can talk to. You can talk to Bill and you can talk to Dana. You can talk to lots of other companies to get information and get a good sense of what is the ecosystem out there to make sure that you're connected to all pieces of it. Because there's no sense in driving ahead in one aspect of your business and think you're ready to launch and then realize that you've got to spend 4 years going through some kind of a regulatory process to get that to market. So again, the one step at a time approach, making sure that you are taking the right next step is something that I think is important for anyone, at least on the entrepreneurial side, to think about. And then if you're more on the support side, to make sure you are learning about new and emerging industries to see how you might be able to help them.
Yeah, and I think what you say applies to anyone who's trying to expand their business. If you're building out a new business line, or or expanding, horizontally, you probably have to take all those steps over again. It's a startup. Yeah, Lejjy, what's your big takeaway that you'd like to leave with us?
Yeah, I like the one because there's a lot of new investors coming into the cellular agriculture space. I spoke with a firm where their focus was real estate, which is very different than investing in biotechnology.
Yeah, well, the Canadian Teachers Pension Plan invested in Perfect Day.
Exactly.
So,
yeah. And it's kind of the thought, especially for people that are not familiar with it, there is the interpretation that food is boring or ingredients are boring.
What? That's true? People think that?
Yeah. See,
but gosh, my whole life shattered.
part of the reason why this investor came forward to us as part of our thesis of having started Cult Food Science in the first place is that food is power. We might be talking about like beef or milks or proteins or whatever it may be. But if there's one thing that has both shaped the outcomes of both nations and communities alike is food, whether that's accessibility, availability, price. With a lot of
we can't do any of the things that we want to do in our day without it, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Getting to the point about it being a technology and product of necessity versus convenience, and that there's as much opportunity in this space now, given things like climate change and sustainability, where those factors will change, where if you don't take advantage of it, we're going to run into real problems. And at the same time, those problems represent opportunity even larger than ones that we've seen before with being able to address what's coming in the future. So really,
and you mean
on it.
More people, less
availability
climate,
of food,
climate stability, et cetera.
Yeah, and that's where cellular agriculture really comes in, and then even countries have commented on how they might be able to utilize it to address food security issues that they see coming 30 years down the road, because they know they're not going to have arable land anymore.
Yeah.
So food is power, and opportunity is really the point.
Food is power. I like it. Bill, over to you.
Yeah, our overarching topic was technology and innovation today. There's a lot of themes running through here around, we can't take anything in isolation. We need access to capital, but I'll maybe settle on the theme kind of running through a lot of the conversation I'm hearing today, which is the importance of collaboration.
Yeah.
And so we are on the cusp of something big in Canada in plant-based food and alternative protein space and cellular agriculture. But the convergence of innovation that's happening right now and the importance of bringing together the right actors inside of an organization, because we've got supply, we've got intellectual property, we've got technology, we've got AI, and the problems that we're trying to solve are not solvable by any one organization, and it's far more cost effective to get there through collaborative innovation. And so that's the piece that that we're really focused on at Protein Industries Canada, and I think will underpin the success of the technological innovation going forward.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So Mohammed, last word goes to you before hopefully we'll have a time for a question or two.
Yeah, I would echo the sentiment that the opportunity in food innovation is tremendously exciting, and it's a result of at least the fact that number one, governments around the world, thanks to COVID, unfortunately, have realized that food security is intimately tied to national security. Yeah. So this is an extraordinarily important factor for so many countries around the world. We just received a fairly sizable investment from a South Korean firm that is looking and very excited about this potential idea of domestic protein production, thanks to the food sovereignty that the idea of a fully enclosed protein production system enables.
And that's very appealing to other countries like Singapore and Israel as well,
absolutely,
right?
Absolutely. The second point is food is not software. So, I only use one email client. I don't use 5, but I would not eat the same thing every day. Or if I can, I wouldn't. Yeah. So the idea that, there has to be one winner in every category, or in the category of food, is a false equivalency, and it has to be discarded. People are very complex, and food is very emotional, and people enjoy a diversity of protein options in their diets. And the last point is, this is very early days for a lot of food innovation. If we think back to the first laptop, the first iPhone, the first floppy disk.
And before the first iPhone, there was the iPod, right? We had to take a lot of steps.
That's right. So, just imagine how exciting it is if what Aspire is today, as impressive as it might appear to you, it's only like the first iPhone. And what this is going to look like 10 years from now is what makes me so excited to wake up every morning.
That's right. The computer gaming industry didn't stop at Pong.
Yeah, thankfully.
Although I loved that game, I'm not going to lie. All right, well, with the lights, it's difficult to see, but I can't imagine that there are not questions for this amazing panel. Yes, excellent. Yes, please. We'll bring you a mic. There you go, sir.
My name is Charles Ashour. I'm Director of Grower and Product Development for my company, National Produce Marketing. We're one of the largest mango, papaya, and avocado importers in Canada.
Well, thank you for that. Those are favorites.
3 superfoods. You eat those, you don't have to worry about anything else. Anyway, just maybe some coconut water will be good. But anyway, so I have a question. We haven't talked about GMOs here. That's a very important technology that I'm not particularly fond of, but it's important. I think we're too young to throw it out there to consumers without them knowing what they're eating. What do you guys have to say about GMOs, if you don't mind me asking that question?
Well, it is.
I hope it kind of works.
No, well, it's a topic in and of itself, but it is an excellent question. You know, genetically modified foods, you know, in my own experience, having studied it extensively and even written about it, you know, there's a lot. It's a big, broad topic, and certainly, my understanding is that when we do look at germplasm, and David, this is something you know a lot about. You used to work in university technology transfer offices that dealt with germplasm. That we can really get, you know, much higher yields, et cetera. And from what I've seen in Europe, the yields for the non-GMO movement are lower. And would you like to take this question?
Yeah, so again, at Natural Products Canada, we're solution agnostic. There are so many problems in the world that we have to solve in terms of food and population and climate change that we don't want to take any solution off the table. The question around GMO is what market is it going into? So if I'm marketing a health food and I want to put a genetically modified probiotic into that food, that customer base is not likely to accept it because they've decided that GMO is bad for whatever reason. As a scientist, I could try to argue back, but whatever, people have the right to have choice. However, if you're creating a modified bacteria to produce a recyclable plastic and help the environment in terms of having truly compostable plastics, but you're using transgenic or GMO technology to produce those bugs, to produce that, maybe that's a good thing. And society would say, on balance, I see how it's good to have a recyclable plastic, and I don't really care that it was a GMO bug that made it, I'm not eating it, etc. Then that industry might be able to accept it. There's an awful lot of what they call precision fermentation out there where ingredients are being made, but because the ingredients themselves are chemically identical and indistinguishable from any of those chemicals that could be produced through distilling petroleum things or other things, that they are truly equivalent, right? So again, it's all going to depend on your industry, and there is going to be room for biotech in providing some of the solutions to the problems while still allowing choice for other people.
And one more thing I wanted to say, because I'm heavily involved in agriculture. This is an incredible, by the way, seminar.
Thank you.
80% of agriculture, correct me if I'm wrong, but these are my statistics, 80% of agriculture in the world is dedicated to the development of animal protein. That's gross. That's really the problem. There's enough arable land in the world for hundreds of more years to feed the whole world. And we stop feeding animals and we start feeding people.
Well,
that's a fact.
Yeah.
I want to know what you guys have to say about that.
If we had time, I would love to allow you. We are at like 6 seconds to our time. It's a highly debatable topic. I would encourage you to reach out to Dr. Evan Fraser. He just wrote a book called Dinner on Mars, and he has a lot to say about that topic. He's a great guy, a good friend of mine. Email me and I'll introduce you.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you, panel. You guys are awesome. We probably could have taken up the whole day, but and thank you to you.